It was 11:51 p.m. The blue light of my monitor was the only thing keeping me awake. My finger hovered over the mouse, trembling slightly from exhaustion. On the screen, a wire transfer for $30,000 sat pending. It was payroll for the Sterling Heritage Inns. My family's legacy. My burden. I was seconds away from clicking confirm when my phone buzzed against the desk. The screen lit up with a message from my mother. I picked it up, expecting a thank you, or maybe a reminder about the gala tomorrow. Instead, I read 5 sentences that stopped my heart. Don't come to the gala. You're out. Ryan is CEO. It's over between us. Do not contact us. I stared at the words. Then I looked back at the $30,000 waiting to leave my account. The cursor blinked, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel fear. I felt cold. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. You might think I threw the phone against the wall. You might think I collapsed into a sobbing mess on the floor, begging the universe to explain why my own mother would cut me out like a malignant tumor. I didn't. The phone went back on the coaster, face up, next to my cold cup of tea. I stared at the screen, watching the notification light blink. My eyes drifted back to my computer monitor. The banking portal was still open. $30,000. Pending. That money was supposed to cover the payroll for the Lakeview property because my brother, Ryan, had forgotten to authorize the transfers before he left for a weekend in Vegas. Again, I looked at the clock, 11:55 p.m. In 6 hours, a contractor was scheduled to arrive at the flagship hotel to replace the HVAC units in the main ballroom. That was another $18,000. I had the invoice pulled up in a separate tab, my credit card information already auto-filled, nearly $50,000 of my own money, ready to be poured into the black hole of my family's incompetence, all before sunrise. For years, I had treated my relationship with my parents like a failing stock I refused to sell. I kept buying in, kept averaging down, telling myself that if I just invested a little more capital, a little more sweat, a little more silence, eventually the market would turn. Eventually, they would see my value. I thought I was being loyal. But that night, in the blue glow of my office, I realized I wasn't being loyal. I was a victim of the sunk cost fallacy. It is a simple economic principle, really. It is the irrational urge to continue pouring resources into a losing endeavor simply because you have already invested so much. It is the lie that says you cannot walk away from the table because you have already lost too many chips. You convince yourself that the next hand will be the winner. The next check will buy their respect. The next bailout will make them love you. But the market doesn't care about your feelings, and neither did my family. They didn't see me as a partner. They saw me as a line of credit with no limit and no interest rate. I realized then that I wasn't paying for their survival. I was paying to avoid the pain of admitting that my investment had gone to zero. I took a breath. It wasn't shaky. It was deep and steady. I moved the mouse. The cursor slid across the white pixelated space and hovered over the confirm button. I didn't blink. I slid it to the left. Cancel. I clicked. The sound was sharp in the quiet room. The screen refreshed. Transaction terminated. The $30,000 remained in my account. I didn't stop there. I opened the tab for the HVAC contractor. The billing data vanished with a single keystroke. I typed a quick email to the project manager. Work order canceled. Do not proceed. Contact Robert Sterling for payment. Sent. Next, the catering deposit for the gala. I logged into the vendor portal. Withdrew authorization. One by one, I cut the lines. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like a structural correction. It felt like fixing a clerical error that had persisted for 32 years. When I finally closed the laptop, the fan whirred to a stop. The room was perfectly silent. There was no chaos, no screaming, no drama, just the quiet hum of the city outside and the realization that for the first time in my life, I wasn't holding up the sky. I sat back in my chair and listened to the silence. It was heavy, Yes, but it was clean. If you live in the Midwest, you know the name Sterling Heritage Inns. You have probably seen the commercials. Soft piano music, sweeping drone shots of the manicured lawns. My father, Robert Sterling, standing in the lobby of the flagship hotel in Chicago, promising timeless elegance. To the public, we were American royalty. We were the custodians of history. But if you peel back the flocked wallpaper and look behind the mahogany paneling, you won't find history. You will find rot. For the last 10 years, I wasn't just the daughter, I was the shadow fixer. My official title on the website was consultant, a vague footnote at the bottom of the About Us page. But in reality, I was the structural integrity of the entire operation. When the roof of the Milwaukee property collapsed under heavy snow 3 winters ago, my father didn't call the insurance company. He called me. He didn't have the premiums paid up. I covered the deductible and managed the reconstruction crews while he gave interviews about resilience. When the IRS audited the company in 2015, because my mother, Susan, tried to write off a family vacation to Tuscany as a business expense, I was the one who sat in a windowless room with the auditors for 3 days. I negotiated the penalties. I paid the fines from my personal savings. And then there was Ryan. My brother was 29 years old and held the title of Chief Executive Officer. In our family, that title meant he wore $3,000 suits, drank scotch at 2 in the afternoon, and talked loudly about synergy and brand elevation. Ryan was the golden child. He was charismatic, handsome, and completely incompetent. He treated the business like a personal ATM and a playground. He would announce a bold new vision to renovate the gardens, and everyone would clap. Then, when the cameras turned off, he would leave the invoices on my desk. I was the one who hired the landscape crews. I was the one who sourced the drought-resistant flora. I was the one who made sure the checks didn't bounce. My parents loved the idea of Ryan. They loved the fantasy that their son was a captain of industry. It validated their vanity. I, on the other hand, was just the utility. I was the generator humming in the basement, unseen, unappreciated, but absolutely essential to keeping the lights on. They didn't love me. They relied on me. There is a difference. You don't thank a generator for working, you only kick it when it stops. The tragedy of the Sterling family wasn't that they were cruel. It was that they were blind. They genuinely believed their own press release. They thought the business was profitable because Ryan was a genius. They didn't know or chose not to know that the only reason we weren't in foreclosure was because I was silently injecting liquidity into the accounts every month. But as I sat there in the dark, watching the hours tick by, I realized something terrifyingly simple. By cutting me out, they hadn't just hurt my feelings. They had severed their own lifeline. Without my capital, without my management, and without my silence, the Sterling Heritage Empire didn't have months to survive. It didn't even have weeks. They had less than 48 hours. The next morning, my phone didn't just ring, it screamed. I woke up at 7 a.m. to 37 missed calls. 14 were from my mother, 12 from my father, 11 from Ryan. The voicemails were stacked like planes circling a closed airport, their urgency escalating with every timestamp. Answering them wasn't on the agenda. Coffee was. I sat by the window, watching the rain streak the glass, and opened my laptop to check the local weather in Chicago. It was unseasonably warm, a humid 88 degrees. Perfect weather for a garden party. Terrible weather for a black tie gala in a ballroom with no air conditioning. I finally tapped the first voicemail. It was Ryan. His voice wasn't the smooth baritone he used for investors. It was high, tight, and cracking at the edges. Hannah, pick up the phone. The HVAC crew isn't here. It's 80 degrees in the ballroom, and the ice sculptures are melting. Fix this. The next one was my mother, 20 minutes later. The caterer just called. They said the deposit was withdrawn. They aren't coming. We have 200 guests arriving in 6 hours, Hannah. This isn't funny. Call them back right now and apologize. Then came my father, an hour later. His voice was a low growl. You are ruining this family. You are selfish. You are vindictive. If you don't transfer the funds immediately, I will call the police. I almost laughed at that one. Call the police? For what? For failing to pay a bill that wasn't in my name? For refusing to donate my own money to a company I didn't own? In the past, these messages would have triggered a panic attack. My chest would have tightened. I would have felt the crushing weight of their disapproval and rushed to save them, apologizing for my own existence while I wrote the checks. I would have played the role they assigned me, the emotional sponge, absorbing their chaos so they could stay clean. But today, I practice something different. I practice the gray rock method. It is a psychological strategy used when dealing with toxic narcissists. The concept is simple. You become uninteresting. You become impenetrable. You become a gray rock lying on a beach. The waves of their drama crash over you, screaming and foaming, but the rock does not react. It does not argue. It does not defend itself. It offers no jagged edges for them to grab onto. It just sits there. Toxic people feed on supply emotional reactions that validate their power. If I argued, I gave them supply. If I cried, I gave them supply. Even if I explained myself, I gave them supply. So, I gave them nothing. I watched the disaster unfold on social media like I was watching a documentary about a train wreck. Guests were tweeting about the heat. An influencer posted a photo of a wilted floral arrangement with the caption "Sterling Heritage Meltdown." My mother posted a vague, passive-aggressive status update on Facebook. Hard times reveal the snakes in your own garden. Pray for our family as we deal with betrayal. I read it. I didn't like it. I didn't comment. I didn't text her to defend myself. I let the accusation sit there, absorbing the silence. I realized then that their anger wasn't proof that I had done something wrong. It was proof of their parasitism. A parasite always attacks the host when it tries to detach. Their panic confirmed what I had suspected the night before. Without me, the golden child was just a man in a hot room with no food, no money, and no one left to blame but himself. I took a sip of my coffee. It tasted perfect. While the ice sculptures were turning into lukewarm puddles at the Sterling Gala, I was walking through the revolving glass doors of Apex Hospitality. The difference in atmosphere was physical. The air inside the Apex headquarters was crisp, conditioned to a precise 68 degrees. It smelled of espresso and ionized air, not the dusty potpourri and floor wax that permeated my parents' hotels. There was no shouting, no frantic running, just the quiet, rhythmic hum of competence. I wasn't there to apply for a job. I was done being an employee. I was there to broker a deal. I checked in at the front desk. Hannah Sterling to see Marcus Thorne. Senior Development. The receptionist didn't blink at my last name. At Apex, names didn't matter as much as numbers. 5 minutes later, I was sitting in a corner office overlooking the skyline. Marcus Thorne was younger than I expected, sharp-featured and wearing a suit that actually fit a stark contrast to Ryan's flashy, oversized tailoring. He looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. I have to admit, "I'm surprised," Marcus said, leaning back in his chair. "We usually only hear from the Sterlings when your father is threatening to sue us for zoning encroachments. Is he sending you as an envoy?" "My father doesn't know I'm here," I said. My voice was steady. "And I'm not an envoy. I'm a consultant with a very specific portfolio." I reached into my bag and pulled out a heavy, leather-bound binder. I slid it across the glass table. It landed with a solid thud. Marcus opened it. He expected, I'm sure, to see landscape designs or interior mood boards. Instead, he saw spreadsheets. He saw debt structures. He saw a comprehensive analysis of the deferred maintenance costs for all 6 Sterling properties, cross-referenced with the current zoning laws that my father had been ignoring for a decade. "This isn't a design portfolio," Marcus said, his eyes scanning the pages faster now. "No," I replied. "It's an acquisition strategy." I stood up and walked to the window. The Sterling properties are leveraged at 80%. The liquidity is gone. The maintenance is 3 years behind schedule. Specifically, The flagship property sits on a parcel of land that Apex has been trying to acquire for 5 years to expand your convention center footprint. You haven't been able to buy it because my father refuses to sell out of pride. I turned back to him. He won't have a choice soon. The loans are callable. When they default, and they will default within the week the bank will auction the debt, I'm giving you the roadmap to buy it for pennies on the dollar. Marcus looked up from the binder. The skepticism was gone, replaced by the calculating look of a predator recognizing a fellow hunter. Why bring this to us? Why not save them? I spent 10 years saving them, I said coldly. It didn't work. Now, I'm interested in building something that actually stands up. I know where the bones of those buildings are rotten, Marcus, and I know how to fix them, but I can't do it as a Sterling. I can only do it as a partner at Apex. I wasn't the invisible daughter anymore. I wasn't the help. In that cool, quiet office, I finally understood what I had become. I wasn't just giving them inside information. I was handing them the keys to the kingdom. I was no longer the architect of my family's survival. I was the architect of their replacement. Marcus closed the binder. He didn't smile, but he nodded. It had been 7 days since the gala. 7 days since I walked out of Apex with a conditional offer. 7 days of radio silence from my family. I assumed they were scrambling to find a new lender, or perhaps drafting a lawsuit. I didn't expect the collapse to arrive on my doorstep in a trench coat soaked with rain. It was 9 p.m. when the knock came. It wasn't the pounding fist of my father or the frantic banging of my brother. It was a timid, rhythmic tapping, a plea. I opened the door to find Emily standing in the hallway. Emily was Ryan's fiancée and the chief financial officer of Sterling Heritage. Usually, she was the picture of corporate poise, blow-dried hair, tailored blazers, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Tonight, she looked like a ghost. Her mascara was smeared. Her hair was plastered to her forehead, and she was clutching a thick manila envelope against her chest like a shield. "He doesn't know I'm here," she whispered. Her voice was trembling. "I left him, Hannah. I left him an hour ago." I stepped aside to let her in. She didn't sit down. She walked straight to my kitchen island and dropped the envelope on the marble counter. It landed with a heavy, wet slap. "You need to see this," she said. "I can't go down for this. I won't go to prison for him." Prison. The word hung in the air, sucking the oxygen out of the room. I opened the envelope. I expected to see overdue tax notices or perhaps evidence of an affair. What I found was a forensic autopsy of a crime in progress. There were bank statements showing wire transfers, massive ones. 50,000 here, 100,000 there. But they weren't going to vendors. They weren't going to repairs. They were going to offshore crypto exchanges. "He's been gambling," Emily said, her voice cracking. "For 2 years. He leveraged the operating capital on high-risk altcoins. He lost it all, Hannah. The liquidity isn't just low. It's gone." The next page was the kill shot. It was a loan document from a predatory private equity lender, a hard money loan with an exorbitant interest rate, secured against the deeds of all 6 properties. At the bottom of the page, underneath Ryan's frantic, scrawling signature, were 2 other signatures, Robert Sterling, Susan Sterling. "They signed as guarantors," I said, my finger tracing my mother's elegant, looping handwriting. "Did they know what this was?" Emily shook her head. "No. Ryan told them it was a bridge loan for expansion. He told them it was just paperwork to secure the new branding initiative. They didn't read it, Hannah. They never read anything he gives them. They just signed." I stared at the signatures. In that moment, the final piece of the psychological puzzle clicked into place. I understood the shadow self. My parents didn't hate me because I was a failure. Every time I fixed a problem, every time I paid a bill, every time I pointed out a risk, I forced them to look at their own incompetence. I represented the reality they wanted to ignore. That work is hard, that details matter, and that legacy must be earned. Ryan, on the other hand, was their projection. He was the fantasy. He represented the lie they told themselves that success was a birthright, that they were special, that the rules didn't apply to them. They trusted him blindly, because trusting him blindly meant trusting their own delusion. They signed that document not out of love, but out of vanity. And now, that vanity was going to cost them everything. The loan was callable upon default of the first payment. Emily whispered. That was yesterday. The lender has already moved to seize the assets. I closed the folder. The shadow self had finally stepped into the light, and it was holding a foreclosure notice. You did the right thing coming here, Emily, I said quietly. Do you have copies of all of this? Good, I said. Because tomorrow morning, I have a meeting with my parents, and I'm going to need you to come with me. We met at the Drake. My father chose it, of course. He liked the high ceilings and the waiters in white jackets. He liked places that made him feel like a titan of industry, even when his pockets were empty. They were already seated when I arrived. My mother was staring out the window, her hand gripping a linen napkin so tight her knuckles were white. My father sat stiffly, his jaw set in that familiar line of disappointment. And Ryan was vibrating. He was checking his phone under the table, his leg bouncing nervously. When I approached, they looked up. There was no greeting, no hello. Just the predatory gaze of 3 drowning people spotting a life raft. Sit down, my father said. It wasn't an invitation, it was an order. I sat. I didn't take off my coat. We don't have time for your little rebellion. Hannah, my father started, his voice low and raspy. The bank is threatening to call the loan. We need $60,000 to cover the interest payment by close of business today. Transfer it now, and we can discuss your reinstatement into the family trust. My mother reached across the table, her eyes wet with practiced tears. We're willing to forgive you, sweetheart. For the gala, for the embarrassment. Just do the right thing. Help your brother fix this. Ryan leaned back, summoning a smirk that looked more like a grimace. Yeah, Hannah. Stop being dramatic. It's just a liquidity crunch. I've got a deal closing next week that will cover everything. I looked at them. I looked at the coffee cup in front of me. I took a slow sip. Then, I reached into my bag. I'm not here to transfer money, I said. My voice was quiet, cutting through the ambient noise of silverware and polite conversation. I'm here to return something. I slid the first folder across the table. It was the one Emily had given me. It stopped in front of Ryan. What is this? He asked. It's a record, I said. Of the $400,000 you wired to offshore crypto exchanges in the last 8 months, and the loan documents you tricked Mom and Dad into signing. My father snatched the papers. His eyes scanned the lines. His face went pale, then a blotchy, violent red. Crypto? Ryan, what is this? It's a hedge. Ryan stammered, his voice rising in panic. It was an investment strategy. The market is just down right now. It'll bounce back. It won't, I said. Because Emily didn't just leave you, Ryan. She documented you. That folder is what the district attorney is going to call Exhibit A. My mother let out a small, strangled sound. My father looked at me, his hands shaking. Hannah, if this is true, we lose the houses. We lose everything. You have to help us. You have the savings. You can pay off the bridge loan. No, I said. I can't. Why not? He snapped. Because you're too selfish to save your own name? No, I said, reaching into my bag again. Because the debt isn't yours anymore. I slid the second folder across the table. It was blue. It bore the silver logo of Apex Hospitality. The bank didn't wait for your payment, Dad. They sold the distress note at 9 a.m. this morning. They sold it to Apex. Silence. Absolute, suffocating silence. Apex? My father whispered. They own us? They own the debt, I corrected. Which means they own the deeds. and since I am the newly appointed lead architect for the Sterling redevelopment project at Apex, technically, I own the demolition order. I opened the folder to the last page. It was a rendering I had drawn days ago. It showed the flagship property, stripped of its rotting facade, gutted, and rebuilt into something modern, sustainable, and unrecognizable. You wanted me to be part of the legacy, I said, standing up. Now I am. I'm the one who's going to tear it down. Ryan looked like he was going to be sick. My mother was openly weeping now, not from manipulation, but from the crushing weight of reality. My father just stared at the rendering, looking old and small. You can't do this, he whispered. We're your family. I looked down at them. I know. That's why I'm giving you a warning. The eviction notices go out tomorrow. I'd start packing. I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. Behind me, I heard the clatter of a cup hitting a saucer, but the sound was faint, drowned out by the steady, rhythmic clicking of my heels on the marble floor. It sounded like a clock ticking. It sounded like progress,